Let's see. Three, two, one. Oh, okay. It's working. Lovely. Great. I just wanted to make sure my camera was all, up there properly and focused and all that crap. Anyways, greetings and salutations to you all. Once again, it is me, the Ravenous Spectre. This video is going to be about what you guys consider to be the better one. Is it science fiction or is it fantasy? Honestly, I love both. I love both science fiction and I love fantasy. I love both of them all the same, all as well. But I lean a little bit more towards the medieval fantasy side. The reason for this is I figure it to be more enchanting. I figure it to be more simple. Like for example, let's say in a novel or in a game or something like that, or in a movie, you usually have weapons that have unique names. This is just a brief example. And in medieval fantasy, they have simple, easy to learn kind of names usually, unless you're making up a language and you try to, you know, be fancy with it or whatever, and you can't pronounce a thing. You just like get all tongue tied to the point you feel like your tongue's just going to fall out of your head. Uh, but when it comes to science fiction, sometimes the name of those weapons can get kind of loopy. Like, say, if you're trying to describe a gun, for example, it has like so many letters and numbers or whatever instead of just having a name in and of itself. This has been my experience when it deals with like science fiction and fantasy and, trying to determine, say, different names of different characters or different weapons or different areas you go to and things of that nature. And like I mentioned before, I love science fiction all the same, but fantasy is mainly where I go to. I love swords and sorcery and swords and sandals and shields and spears and magic and maces and flails and spears and all of that, and elves and dwarves and humans and demons and gods and goddesses, and just that whole thing. It's a much more enchanting thing to me. It's a much more, to me, an engaging kind of thing, more so than science fiction is. And another thing that kind of gets to me, at least from my experiences when it deals with science fiction and fantasy, is that science fiction has more of a colder look to it, more obviously a more industrial metal kind of look to it. Metal. But there's also metal and like the fantasy realm dealing with like say power metal and things of that nature. But that's a different thing altogether. We're not talking about music. We're talking about like games and novels and all that other stuff. Even though I don't necessarily read novels, I don't necessarily read books because they kind of bore me and I fall asleep. Unless it's graphic novels because I have pictures to look at and things of that nature. So whatever. But the thing is that when it boils down to the science fiction side, things are very kind of cold looking, cool colors, and like in the fantasy realm, it has that same thing, but it has warmer, brighter colors also. To me, medieval fantasy has a much more wider color palette than science fiction does, and that's one of the things that I'm really looking for, is that really wide color palette. And like I said, this is just my opinion, this is just my thoughts on the matter and my experiences dealing with either genre, with science fiction and fantasy. And just the way that things look, it's like, say for example, Dragon Age Inquisition, one of my favorite RPG series of all time. You go and look at Inquisition, there is a wide color palette with that game, and there's so many different areas to go to. Meanwhile, with science fiction, it's like, yeah, there's some colors, but to me, it's kind of like the main things that I'll see with science fiction is like neon colors and gray and brown and black and things of that nature. Maybe not so much white, and it's not necessarily like a turnoff for me per se, but it's just not as visually inviting as say medieval fantasy would be when you actually really try to put these realms into perspective. Yeah, and the way that the whole visual, every single visual, it really, that's one of the things that really grabs me, is just that whole you know cascade of colors that's on the screen. And I guess that's one of the things that really does pull me towards medieval fantasy, is because of that, is because of the color palette, because of there being a wider range of colors than there is in the science fiction realm. And if you guys have any thoughts on any type of science fiction you think I should check out that you think has a wider color palette, then leave comments down below and I'll definitely check them out. Because like I said, it's just my experiences and my thoughts and opinions on the matter, so there's no need to shit on me about it. Because you have your opinions just as well, and if you have them, go ahead and leave them below and we can have a little discussion if you so prefer to do so. But Yeah, and another thing, for example, is there was a point in time where I was doing a lot of writing and drawing, and which I haven't done that a lot lately. And this is something I really need to get back into because I have so many ideas just flowing around in my head, and I need to get them down on paper. Um, there was this idea that I had for stories. There was a series of stories that I was writing, but I got so confused with it, and it was medieval fantasy too. Actually, what it was a mixture of science fiction and medieval fantasy into one. It's like one story would start out as medieval fantasy, and the next one would kind of be like science fiction, but it's like they would be in the same universe kind of deal. Um, it's almost like you're looking at the past in one story, and then you're looking at the future in another story. There's nowhere like a present anywhere in between. It's just the past and the future kind of thing. And it's just like it's like I was jumping from story to story, and I was getting so confused in terms of dealing with fantasy and dealing with science fiction that I got confused, and I left a lot of plot points left out, and a lot of plot holes, and just all of that. I just like, oh, hell with it. But some of the drawings and things that I had done was more of a medieval fantasy side, but it did have a science fiction feel to it. And because I was basically like I was trying to make a gradual evolution from like medieval fantasy up to science fiction, starting from like say old world ways into like new world ways kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, science fiction has a lot of great things about it. I mean, especially how deep it can get with its stories, which medieval fantasy is just the same as well. But I mean, what's your guys' thoughts on the matter? I mean, do you prefer medieval fantasy more? Do you prefer science fiction more? What's your whole thoughts on it? I mean, I have a few. I got well, if you can see over there on the wall, I've got Legolas's fighting daggers that I ended up getting for my girlfriend as a Christmas gift. I think it was Christmas. It was either Christmas or Valentine's Day. I don't remember. She'll probably see this video and correct me on it, so whatever. The bottom line is I know that she got it for me as a gift. And if some of you guys ended up seeing some of my previous videos, I think I mentioned that Lord of the Rings, especially the movies and the way that the overall books and stories and things have been adapted to media nowadays in terms of like graphic novels and other novels and backstories and movies and games and all this stuff has really just brought me up to the forefront. And honestly, like, speaking of the medieval fantasy thing, The Lord of the Rings is my top movies of all time. Out of every movie that I've seen, I have a lot of movies that I love and that I've seen, but especially when it comes to the whole medieval fantasy aspect, that series I love to death, and no other movie from the point that I started watching the movies all the way up until now has never been able to top it. Like I said, I have a lot of other movies that I love and that I enjoy and that I own, but when it comes to that, I could watch those movies over and over again, never get tired of them. The same goes with the Hobbit trilogy. I love the Hobbit trilogy all the same. But The Lord of the Rings just is a few steps above the Hobbit trilogy because of the simple fact that it had more mature tones to it. It had more of a mature mindset to it, which The Hobbit did have those as well. But then again, when The Hobbit first came out, it was a kid's story, and it got adapted to like a PG-13 movie, and like the Blu-ray extended edition that came out of the third movie was rated R. Which is funny because you didn't really see any rated R elements in the last movie until like I think halfway or near the end of the third movie, which orcs was getting decapitated, blood was going everywhere, they were getting ran over, limbs were flying off everywhere. It was nuts. um, which is just crazy, which just kind of makes you think, why didn't they do that anyways with the third movie by making it rated R? Because it was a war. It was a massive war that was going on. But I can understand you want to stick with a PG-13 thing because you want to get as much of the audience as you can, and PG-13 is kind of tinkering, along the levels of like PG and R and things like that. So yeah, I can understand why they made the Blu-ray version rated R, the extended version. But maybe they did that with the regular standard version. I don't know. But yeah, it's like those movies have really just brought me to the forefront as well when it deals with medieval fantasy. But like I was speaking before about blades just as well. Yeah, I got those Legolas daggers back there, and she she also got me a Viking sword for my birthday, as a matter of fact. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you that because I love. I mean, a lot of people have things that they collect and things that they like and whatnot. Because you guys see that right there. Yeah, she got that, and it's just like, look how seriously wicked that looks. And from what I've heard, it was like battle ready or something. And when it got shipped here, it has like it's got make sure I'm not going to hit anything on the ceiling or anything like that. It came with, it was wrapped up, and it was crazy though, because when I ended up getting it shipped to my place, I didn't even think about it. I didn't even know that I was even going to get it at all until she sent it to me. And I was like, what the heck is this? And it was just like this long box. And I went, and it took me forever to get into the damn thing. I had to take a knife and like stab into it and twist it around, because it was like a cardboard box, but it was stapled everywhere and just wrapped up in like tape and shit. So, and when I finally got into it, it was obviously, it was wrapped up in bubble wrap and all of that, and it was inside of a sheath. And when I took it out, the blade was wrapped up in plastic because it had oil on it, to keep the blade fresh and whatnot, and all of that. And so I kind of had to do that and take that off and kind of wipe it down a bit and put it all in there and all of that. And I was just like, man, I've never had one like this before, but it's amazing, and it's got some weight to it too, man. It's insane. Oh, there's one other one that I have as well. Let's see if I can actually try to fish it out of the thing here, if I can see where it is. Hang on a second. I'm almost there. And this is one that my uncle actually ended up giving me. That's pretty sweet, huh? It's like, apparently he ended up getting some of these from like his workplace, or not his workplace, but actually from a guy that he used to work with, and that he knows, like a friend of his, and he ended up selling them to him or giving them a lot to him and all of that. And he just ended up going ahead and and he ended up giving me, he said he had a whole lot of them. He didn't even know, my uncle didn't know anything about me actually being into blades or anything like that. It has a very Egyptian feel to it, obviously the way that it looks there. And he told me, he was like, man, if I would have known that, I would have just got you, I would have just, gave you a whole lot of them. He basically ended up selling the other ones anyways. I wish I would have known that. I would have had like more blades than what I have now. But it's funny because like medieval fantasy has also kind of brought me to the point where I like swords. I like that design too. I mean, do you see how awesome that looks? And also, I mean, you got the Viking sword over there, which looks really awesome. And obviously, I've got the Legolas daggers hanging up there. And at some point in time, I'd love to be able to get Sting, which is the sword in The Hobbit, and also Lord of the Rings. When Bilbo Baggins passed it on to Frodo Baggins, when he was going on his adventure to go cast the ring into Mount Doom, the fires of Mount Doom. But yeah, so it's funny because it's I mean, obviously I don't have like science fiction guns or weapons or anything like that, but I know that they're out there for sure. I mean, I've also ended up seeing like a replica of, say for example, like the game Gears of War. They have like a replica of like the chainsaw gun or whatever it is, which is like really badass. I think that's like one of the most craziest weapons ever devised in a game. But yeah, I mean, I plan on getting some more blades in the future and whatnot, and it's just one of those genres that kind of really permeates me in terms of like, well, it's not only that I just like the genre in terms of like games and and movies and things of that nature, but also kind of in the real world, like when you're dealing with like, decorative blades and swords and daggers and things like that. I've really liked stuff like that. I always have, and it's just like recently that I've started to get things like this. I know this video has been a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things, but it kind of really just focuses on me, kind of how medieval fantasy is like the main type of genre that I go to in terms of me really being attracted to something and like the imaginative world, when it deals with media, when it deals with like video games and movies and things of that nature. Like I said, I'm not hating on sci-fi at all. I love sci-fi to death. I do. But just medieval fantasy is the one that kind of just goes a little bit above sci-fi because of the overall color palette and the overall naming convention, I guess you could say. And of course, sci-fi has weird naming conventions as well, like for different races and languages and things you can create. But the exact same thing goes with medieval fantasy. But there's just that more enchanting tone to it with medieval fantasy, at least for me, from my perspective now. And and sci-fi definitely has its moments just as well. I especially love sci-fi when it really does a throwback to like 80s synth music. I love the 1980s synth music, especially like in some of the songs. There's just a really unique, there's a real unique sound and tone and flavor to it, especially in like suspense slash horror slash like action movies of the 80s. It always kind of had that synth vibe to it. I just think it's a really awesome sound, especially when you can just make it sound as amazing as you can. Like, for example, there was a demo that I was playing yesterday, as a matter of fact. I don't even know if the full game is out yet, but it's called Neon Chrome, and it's like an overhead kind of, well, it's not a twin stick shooter, but you move around with the left stick and you kind of aim with the right stick and you press R2 and whatnot to shoot and things like that. But I think you're like a cyborg or something. You get these different enhancements as you go along, as you level up and go along, and it's an overhead shooter, and the music in it is crazy. Like, it sounds so awesome, like the synth music and all of that from like the beginning of the title screen as I'm going throughout the game. Granted, I didn't get super far into it or nothing like that, and I may want to actually get into the future because it did really seem like it was really cool. And I only played a couple levels, you know, and especially considering it was a demo, I didn't get to the end of the demo, but it seemed like it was pretty sweet. So there's kind of an example of how I really love Sci-Fi. They had like the nice neon colors and the synth sound and, you know, the whole cyborg aspect and the guns and the whole, oh, we're a big organization trying to take things over and somebody is going to take us down kind of thing. You know, that whole deal, which is something that I've obviously been really for, like say a lone soldier or something in the sci-fi world going against like a big multi-billion-dollar corporation or something like that because they're so corrupted and things like that. That's something that I've always really liked about sci-fi. Which, I mean, the exact same thing could be said for medieval fantasy just as well, because of the fact that, you know, you have an evil king tyrant or whatever, and you're trying to take him down and put a new king on the throne, you know, so everything won't be as corrupted and all this and that. Excuse me. But anyways, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the deal. I didn't even know I was going to be talking for this long, to be quite honest. I never know how long I'm going to talk until I actually get to the end of the damn video. You know, I could be sitting there and be like, where's ain't going to be a long video? And sure enough, the damn thing is a long video. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end this now. And if you guys have any discussions or anything that you want to discuss on the matter, then go ahead and leave a comment below. And it's kind of funny I mentioned sci-fi, considering the fact that I'm wearing a Fallout shirt. You know, by the way, funny little thing. You know how in the Fallout 4 commercial how they have the song Wanderer playing as you know, the Vault Survivor is coming out and he's shooting up the super mutants and all of that. Well, I walked into a gas station today because I was going to go in there to get something to eat because they have a Subway that's in there. And I walked in there wearing a Fallout shirt and the song Wanderer was playing on the radio as I walked in through the door, and I just kind of laughed at myself. I was like, well, fancy that. Which, by the way, I also have that song because every time I listen to it, it always reminds me of that Fallout 4 commercial. But anyways, that's another side note there. But anyways, I'll go ahead and end this like I always do. Later, taters. And be sure to leave comments if you like fantasy, if you like science fiction. I love having discussions on things like this because I love being able to explore other genres and other avenues when it deals with like either fantasy or science fiction, things of that nature. So if you have any type of opinions or thoughts or comments or anything, then be sure to leave them below. And if you have any recommendations, then be sure to let me know. And we can probably swap back and forth recommendations if you so choose to do so. So anyways, I will talk at you taters later. Later, taters.